At a time when so many of us feel like our connections with people are distant and conversations are surface level, really engaging with each other takes intention. I'm Ashley Gould, the founder of Attend, an elevated, everyday home brand with products that set the table for meaningful spaces and gatherings. Our podcast builds on those spaces through dynamic discussions with open-hearted people, with the goal of sparking conversation around your table. It's my pleasure to welcome Autumn Bear to On the Table with Ashley today, a podcast where you rediscover your curiosity through open conversations and human connection. Autumn is a nationally board-certified acupuncturist with a private practice in Park City, Utah. Autumn was trained in classical Chinese medicine by esteemed Taoist master and 88th generation practitioner Jeffery Yuen. She apprenticed with the Commonwealth Herbal Program in Boston, mastering dietary therapy and Western herbal medicine. Autumn also worked towards a Master's of Public Health at the University of Arizona with a specialty in international medicine and maternal and child health, where she continued her focus in the areas of epidemiology, nutrition, environmental health, physiology, and psychology. She is licensed to practice acupuncture by the states of Utah and New York and is board certified diplomat of acupuncture as conferred by the National Certification Commission for Acupuncture and Oriental Medicine. Autumn is also currently a member of the board of the Utah Department of Professional Licensing for Acupuncture. Her Master's of Science in Acupuncture is from the Swedish Institute of Health Sciences in New York City. Autumn also teaches. She has taught as a professor at the Pacific College of Oriental Medicine in New York, as well as in programs focusing on integrating acupuncture into mainstream medicine at both the Université Paris Faculté de Médecine Paris Sud and at the Wu Ming Dao Healing Center in Moscow. You can find Autumn at her website, www.autumnbear.com, by email at autumn@autumnbear.com, on Instagram at Autumn Bear Acupuncture, TikTok at Autumn Bear Acupuncture LAC, and on Facebook at Autumn Bear Acupuncture. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming. So I'm trying something new today. I want to ask you 5 questions that I ask every guest, and we're pushing this to the beginning of the show, and we'll see what format people like better. So my first question is, as we explore in my brand Attend, which means to take care of your soul in French, objects can hold a lot of meaning for us. They can tie us to the past, enable us to enjoy the present more, or even take us into the future. Can you share an object and let us know what its meaning is and why you chose it?
This is actually a really hard question because I feel like there's so many things that we collect along the way in our lives that have meaning. I would say for me, it's a teacup. So my dad is a potter, and he's been a potter since I was a little girl. And I've rarely ever had to buy teacups or plates or bowls or any of those types of stoneware ever in my entire life. And there is something so absolutely lovely when I open my cabinet and there's a mix mosh of teacups, but I have a couple that I've had around. I think there's probably one I've had since my childhood that's been in my dad's collection and then now in my collection. And it's a little bit on the rustic side and, more delicate than the others. It's only 20 years old, but it's probably one of my favorite things because whenever life is hard for me, it's almost about having that moment to sit down, have a breath, take a cup of tea, and just sit with it for a few minutes because most big decisions aren't made in an instant. And life does have its ups and downs. Yeah. And the consistency for me is to be able to just sit down, whether that be by myself or with friends, and have a cup of tea and just be for a minute.
I love that. So we have hand-thrown ceramics, and it's funny because our coffee mug is probably our best-selling item right now. And I think part of it is like you feel kind of the energy of it being hand-thrown and its imperfection And there's just something like magical about that. So we have lots of coffee mugs too. And everybody in my family always reaches for the hand thrown ones.
The hand thrown ones are the best. I like the lumpy one. I really like the strange little bits where, maybe there's a bumpy spot or maybe the handle, right? Like I have this one mug that I absolutely love and the handle's big enough I can put my entire hand in it.
Yeah.
And I just love the way that feels, right?
Yeah. And you have the added benefit of your father having like made them, which is so cool. So I'd love to get a picture.
Yes, of course. Okay. Absolutely. I have some that he made for me.
That's so
when
cool.
I left the house, he made me a whole set just for college and I still have some of those.
That's amazing. Yeah. That's amazing. Really cool. Can you share a favorite tradition with us? It could be something that you did when you were young or something you do with your children. Could revolve around food or a vacation spot or anything at all.
We have a new tradition that started this year. My son, who is now 7, but at the time 6, was learning all about different traditions around the world, especially around kind of the Christmas, Hanukkah space and time. And there's this German tradition where they hang a pickle in their tree.
I've never heard this. Okay.
It's a Christmas pickle. And so my son made a Christmas pickle and it has like a little funky face on it. It's got like the eyeballs that are like going the wrong directions. And I just fell in love with it. And we happened to be in this like funny little Christmas store. And sure enough, they had an entire box of Christmas pickles, little ornaments. And I thought, this is it. I've got to have pickles on my tree. So my children are incredibly happy to have pickles that hang on our tree. And I definitely think that'll be a tradition that will carry on. In spite of some of the other traditions that happen, that one makes everyone giggle.
I love that. Are you in a phase in your life where you enjoy entertaining in your home? Why or why not?
I love to entertain. I love to cook. I love to have parties. I love having people over. There's just something so connecting about having someone in your house and your space. And so, our place is kind of the drop by place, drop by anytime. And people know this, they bring people over. It's kind of an, hey, you guys home? Yeah, we're home. And then they just come over. I also like to, I don't know, there's just something so refreshing about having a party in the summer. I just found this recipe for a frozen Aperol spritz.
Stop it.
I know. I can't stop it. So I'm like scouring the internet for those like frosé machines that you could like have in your house.
Yeah.
I have entertained even getting like a professional grade just because I really, really love the idea of having people pop over for frozen Aperol spritz.
I mean,
that's it. Just the idea of it.
That is like quintessential summer.
Yeah, exactly.
That's amazing. I love it. Okay. I like to ask that question because my brand is really focused on creating human connection. And I think so much of human connection happens in the home when you invite people that you either know very well or actually not that well. Either way, to sit down at a table, I think is one of the most beautiful ways to spend time together.
Well, and we also, we moved here to Park City from New York City, and both locations are spaces that are very desirable and people love to visit.
Yeah.
But they're also expensive or it's hard to get a place or whatever. And so we just started to really just open our home for anybody who wanted to stay with us whenever they came into town. And it did get a little out of control, like at some juncture when our kids were really little and we had babies and dogs and like the whole night. And so we just had that caveat. We're like, listen, if you're A-okay with like Legos on the floor and, but we'll give you a home cooked meal and we will, we'll make you feel comfortable and loved. And, as long as you're not stuck too hard on having like the perfect experience.
Right. Yes.
Then we're in, right?
Yeah.
And the truth is I think people love that more than anything else, because they were home, right?
Right.
Home away from home.
That's right. Yeah. I love that. And we have a lot of that too. I do think Park City it's such a destination that people just want to come, which is amazing. Yeah. And it's amazing in every season. Yep. So you can have people all year round.
Year round.
Do you have one or two resources that you love, whether they're websites or books or other podcasts? And it could be on the subject of acupuncture, long COVID.
Well, long COVID, unfortunately, there isn't a lot of resources out there. Yeah. And that is part of why I started diving in the first place. But I'll give you my favorite book.
Okay.
Because it's one that I keep on the shelf and we give it away. And it's called My Family and Other Animals. It's based on, so by Gerald Durrell is who wrote it. And it was based kind of loosely on his life. And it really takes place kind of, I think, late 30s, early 40s when the war is happening. And there's 4 children. Jerry's one of them. And his father dies. And this mother's left with this kind of very weak pensioners fund. And they're in England. They have a really hard time kind of just surviving in the gloom and doom. And so they up and decide to move to the island of Corfu. And everything unfolds for them in the most majestic of ways. And the characters are quirky and it makes you laugh. And it's such a pleasant read that it's one of those things that I come back to time and time again, because it reminds me of, it's a book that you can read and it warms you on the inside. Yeah. And, I feel like those are the things that I try to keep and hold dear for whenever, because you never know. Sometimes you're just like, you know what? I'm in the mood for something awesome. So that's the one I keep around. But yeah, I think that one would be probably my go-to. And, I really love documentaries. I really love podcasts. Like I tend to kind of, roam in those areas. But I guess if I was going to do any sort of media, my favorite is called This Is Love. And it's
I think you told me about this.
Yeah, I told you about it. It's a really, really great podcast. It's like 20 minutes long. Yeah. And it's about people's passions. Okay. And I think that's really interesting. And it goes a lot with kind of what you're doing, right? Yeah. Very similar.
And you're also writing a book. We're going to get into this, but just tell us a little bit about that right now.
So I'm writing a book on long COVID in particular. Long COVID is a really complicated subject. There's a lot of controversy around it. There's a lot of physicians that aren't even sure they think it exists. But the going statistic at this juncture is the average is 10% of the global population has long COVID. And unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be anything that is helping these people heal. And there's a lot of drugs out on the market for other types of ailments, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're the right fit. And so people aren't really healing. And I've just stumbled into working with long COVID and I've had a huge success rate. And so I just decided, at this moment in time, this is really relevant and important for people to have this information. That's still a lot of people. And I feel like it's a really valuable piece of information to get out there.
So we'll talk more about that as we get into it. But as that book becomes materialized, we'll add it to the show notes as well.
Thank you.
And then my last question for these 5 questions is, what do you do for yourself? Do you have a practice, a focus, a habit, or a daily routine that contributes either to your success or your well-being?
That's a really good question. I wake up very early. Okay. I wake up between 5 and 5:30 every morning. And that's usually my time. The world is quiet at that time. And it gives me a chance to, whether I need to go work out or I need to sit and have a cup of tea, whatever it is, that's usually the time that I take to just center myself and find grace, because I have 2 small children. I have a chaotic life, I have big practice. So as the day kind of motors on, it's kind of like a steam train. It picks up speed and keeps on going. And so I find that is the best and most valuable time that I have. Yeah. And and it's really worth, even if it's getting up early, it's really worth that peace that I get to have for half hour in the morning. And that's so valuable to me.
And are you a morning person, or did you make yourself a morning person to protect this time?
I think I'm more of a morning person. Okay. I'm definitely not a night owl. I'm kind of an in the middle person. Like I'm really great between 1 and 3. You know what I mean? If I could have that time, it'd be great. But
doesn't work out. Well, tell us a little bit about where you grew up and what kind of kid you are.
I grew up, so I was born in Fort Collins, Colorado, and my parents are artists. My dad was a potter, as I mentioned, but also a musician, and my mom was a jeweler and a weaver. And so, I kind of grew up with this like really fun hippie, vibe. My mom grew her own food and made her own bread, and, it's kind of like that environment. And then we moved to Southern Arizona when I was about 9, and I grew up the rest of my childhood in Tucson, Arizona. I was an athlete as a kid. And I was always really athletic, and I always really loved school. So I was kind of both the academic kid and the sports oriented kid. I was a competitive gymnast. And then after gymnastics, I ended up having a professional dancing career.
Oh, wow.
And I feel really lucky that I had those sports skills to rely on, because it allows me to push myself, being able to trust myself and what my skills are, and knowing how to read my own body and my own life, whether it's in sports or in career. And I really do think that sports help to teach you that. And so, so I was kind of both a sporty nerdy kid.
I was actually the same kid.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny.
Yeah.
I was not a gymnast.
That's okay.
But I liked very into soccer when I was younger. But I am also a big believer that sports really teach you a lot about life in the world and business and how to be on a team and all of these things. So I'm a big fan.
And have to work hard and prepare and train. And I think that's life. I mean, I really do. I really think that's life.
So true. And then what led you into acupuncture and a study of classical Chinese medicine?
I was always really into health.
Okay.
And so my undergrad was in exercise physiology with an emphasis on high altitude training. And I got through my undergrad and then suddenly realized I didn't want to be a lab rat. Oh, what am I going to do? So I enrolled at the University of Arizona in their public health program. And I thought, okay, this is what I'm going to do. And then I got to the end of my program and I realized I didn't want to be a government servant. And then I was kind of stuck. But at the same time, I had been dancing for fun. And I had this opportunity to dance professionally. So I ended up doing a ton of traveling and dancing, and I got quite sick. And so someone in my family,
the dancing, or
from being in like third world countries, and so I was kind of like on the road all the time, and we went to places, and I ended up getting quite sick. So someone in my family was like, "You should try acupuncture." And acupuncture had barely been legalized at that point in the United States. I fell in love with it. I absolutely fell in love with it. So I ended up being a patient for 10 years before I ended up diving in as a career. And it wasn't until after I had been hired to live in New York and I was dancing in New York full time. And, I kind of had that realization, when you're a dancer, you have a shelf life. And I didn't really want to pursue much further into running a studio or, whatever. And so I started thinking, what am I going to do now? And I was just chatting with someone thinking, I might explore acupuncture. And she was like, oh, there's this school in 26 between 7th and 8th. You should go check it out. And I did. And it was Jeffery Yuen's school. He had this very small school in New York City, and it no longer exists. He only ran it for a small number of years. And then I went to his open house, and it was like clouds parted. Oh, I was like, this is it. And that was it. And I never looked back.
Okay. So tell us, for those unfamiliar, what is acupuncture? Can you give a primer on how it works? And then I want to dive into more of your training.
Acupuncture is actually a really intricate system. It is under the hood of what we would call, so originally it was kind of titled Chinese medicine. We could call it East Asian medicine. There's kind of some changes in how things are being termed and titled and so on. But the idea is that it is an entire system of medicine. And really the tool, it's very similar to what you would look at in terms of Western medicine. There's diagnostics. We use particular tools in order to kind of elicit a healing response. The difference is that we're not using big MRI machines and, and blood work. We're using a whole different set of diagnostics. But overall, we're looking at patterns of the body and where there are imbalances. And our job is to figure out how to rebalance the things that have kind of gone out of whack. And, we have a whole bunch of tools in our arena. Acupuncture is just one tool. We've got herbs, gua sha, cupping. These are all modalities that have been practiced for thousands of years, and they all come into play together. But acupuncture in and to itself is really putting small metal objects into an energetic body. It's a closed circuit system. Our bodies are closed circuit systems with huge amounts of energy. And we're basically putting little metal objects into particular points to elicit a healing response.
Take us through a bit of the training. So you went to this open house. It just happened to be near where you lived?
It was not too far from the studio that I was dancing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it was close to where you were dancing.
Yeah.
You obviously had like an immediate connection. Tell us a little bit more about that. And what did that training look like? And like, what does it mean to work with an 88th generation practitioner?
It's kind of like lectures. So lectures with Jeffrey are kind of like taking a drink out of a fire hose. That's what it feels like. Okay. I mean, it's just this massive amount of information. And you have to recognize that this medicine has been around before the written word. So there's been an oral tradition. The Chinese culture it's over 5,000 years old. And the medical tradition has been in development from the beginning of time as far as that culture is concerned. And so we can date back, 88 generations is a tremendous amount of time. It's thousands of years. And so we are taking in those traditions that have been honed and perfected so that we can then use them kind of not in their raw sense, but in their polished sense, right? Mm-hmm. And what is it like to study with an 88th generation? I mean, it's exactly what you would think. It's pretty tough. The training, I did 3 years year round. So it's a 5-year program that I did in 3 years. And it's basically the equivalent of a PhD. We had about 4,000 hours of training before we could take our board exams. So we had in-course training, we had internships, very similar to what you would see in a regular medical school. It would just happen to be a little bit of a different format.
Mm-hmm. So, like, how big was your class? Like, how many people?
I think there were 10 of us.
So pretty small.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really intimate. And which was also incredible. I had probably 3 or 4 classes a day, each of them several hours. And then we would have clinic shifts towards the end of our schooling. We did clinic shifts with supervised clinical training. And I did everything from, I worked in an infectious disease clinic. I worked in an HIV clinic. I worked in a pain clinic. I did some geriatric work, which was incredible. I had these women, I called them my ladies. Mm-hmm. They were all between the ages of 85 and 93, and they were amazing. So, I got to work with some really, really neat people. And then I went into private practice after I passed my boards and got my license, and they kind of launch you out into the world, and you're like, okay, yeah, I'm here. No one was waiting.
When do you spend the most time with the people you love? For us, it's at home, around the dinner table with family, or sipping cocktails in the living room with friends. So why not make that time even more meaningful by imbuing your gatherings with pieces that not only make connecting easier, but spark conversation around your table? Amaton's collection of small batch, artisan, quality-made pieces for tabletop and home are not only made for simple serving, they're works of art designed for daily use. Whether you're hosting a dinner party or sitting down for family game night, our collections create a sense of presence and peace in every home. Shop our collection of dinnerware, drinkware, serveware, and more at amatond.com. That's AMEATENDRE.com. Gather by design.
Well, that's a whole other subject on growing your own business.
Exactly.
So I want to get into some of the different modalities or techniques, but I'm also just so interested in the melding of Eastern and Western medicine. So you were working in these clinics that were focused on Eastern medicine, or were they Western medicine?
These were all Western medicine clinics that were bringing in acupuncturists as a secondary modality, just kind of an adjunct, right? So this was in the early stages of when acupuncture was really starting to integrate into the Western, or what we would call the allopathic model. And, acupuncture is being utilized on so many levels. And it's a lot more popular now than it was back then when I first got started. But these were all Western. These were all clinics that were in hospitals or care centers, or, particular places where you would have medical clinics. They were all Western clinics.
So, okay, I have a couple of questions. One is, I don't feel like I ever see acupuncture in a Western medical setting. So has that been going the other direction, or is it just depend on where you are?
It depends on where you are. And I think a lot of it, a ton of cancer centers, especially around the United States, they're kind of the ones that have been at the forefront of integration. And I think they're seeing a lot of value in the integration of acupuncture and various different dietary therapies and other things like that are really, really helpful and beneficial. Every sports team in the United States has either an acupuncturist or someone that they go to. Ballet dancers, hockey players, football players, like you name it. There's a lot of it in sports. Definitely, I treat a lot of Olympic athletes up here in Park City. There's a huge need for it in the sports arena as well. But the integration into the Western model, I think it's something that they're starting to have inside hospitals and other clinics and doctors' offices, but it's still not completely. I look forward to the future when we're able to go to every clinic and every hospital and have complementary care as part of that model. Yeah. But it is a growing field. And I do think that there's conversations around it. I get a lot of referrals from the hospital.
That's great.
So I have a lot of doctors. I treat a lot of doctors, believe it or not. Surgeons, you name it. I treat every kind of physician out there. I think there's a lot more open-mindedness as to what capabilities we have to offer in tandem, right?
Well, I hope to see more of that. And then I guess the other question I have is, okay, you have these two systems. How does it work when you combine them? Like, is it, you have Western medicine where you're prescribed like a pharmacologic medicine or something, intervention. And then you are not doing that. You have herbs and acupuncture and cupping and these other modalities. Does there need to be sort of like a discussion between practitioners on how best to serve the patient, or is it obvious?
I mean, it's, I would never interfere with anybody's treatment protocol, right? They go to the doctor's like, we're going to give you these 10 drugs. Not that they do that, but sometimes. Yeah. So, and a lot of times the patients are the ones that are like, I don't want to take this many drugs. Do I have other options? Yeah. And so in that circumstance, a lot of times that conversation with their doctor is like, okay, what are the main things that I can take? And, and then acupuncture or Chinese medicine or a lot of other modalities can come in and help the person with part of the management of their care, depending on what it is. Obviously, if someone's in a car accident and they have massive trauma, like toot sweet to the ER, that's where they should be. Right. But I deal a lot with more chronic pain, chronic disease, autoimmune conditions, digestive disorders, places where the Western medical model really struggles. Okay. And then we kind of slot in the perfect space to be able to manage some of those places where the Western model is really, and I don't want to say inept, because I think it's holes in their system. Yeah. In terms of where they're trained and how they see the body and how they look at healing. I think there's a lot of room for growth there and great room for conversations. I think that's where we fit in.
Okay. And then how do people find you? So is it word of mouth? I don't mean you in particular. I mean, partially I mean you, but acupuncture or Chinese medicine, to say like, I've been going to the doctor and it's not working, or I'm being dismissed at my doctor. I just am reading a book on menopause, and there's been so many years of dismissal of women, of their symptoms, and how many symptoms can be related to menopause. I mean, we have HRT, we have certain things that, but like I can't take that, for example. So, what's available to me. And is it people who have read about it or heard about it? Like, how are they?
That's a really good question. I mean, part of the challenges, and one of the things that I really am passionate about, is bridging that gap so that the conversations between the complementary care and allopathic care are actually stronger, and they are getting stronger. But for example, yes, I get a lot of people where they have all these like really bizarre symptoms, and because they're not life threatening, and because lab work comes back and the doctors will look at the lab work and they're like, well, it looks pretty good. You're not dying. So live with it. Right. Like, it's like that live with it situation. Yeah. And the patients I see, I'm like, oh no, that sounds terrible. Like, let's not live with that. But we have other tools to be able to address those types of imbalances that you don't get from just a drug. And if you can't take the drug, I have a lot of, people who come in who are recovering addicts, right? And they've got pain management and they cannot take those pharmaceuticals because it just will spin them into ruin and destruction. And so we have to find other ways. And so some people come because they are tired of living, not feeling great, and getting brushed off and said like, oh, you're fine. It's all in your head. Yeah. Or nothing we can do about it. Live with it. Like, I get a lot, though I do have a huge number of those patients. Okay. Some patients, they have a family member that's like, oh, I tried acupuncture for blah, 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 and you should try it too. And they go, yeah, okay, I'll try it. Okay, I'll give that a go. So some of it is education and conversation around what our capabilities are, where we can fit into this bigger model. Some of it is people have tried it, they really like it, and they stick with it. Most people who come see me, they come for one reason and stay for another. Okay. Right? Because it is an amazing system of care that also includes longevity, right? This is about health, and it is a wellness model, not a sickness model, right? Like, no, if someone's looking for an acupuncturist, you can find there's lots, every state has different licensing. The National Commission, so the NCCAOM has a website. Anybody who's registered, board certified is going to be in that. And then ask people. I bet if you asked 4 people, like, have you ever tried acupuncture? Probably 3 out of 4 of them have tried it. And they'd be like, oh my gosh, I have the best acupuncturist. You should go see so-and-so. So it's actually something that is a huge word of mouth.
Okay, that's great. But we'll put that website in the show notes too. So I've heard this from people like, oh, I went to an acupuncturist and it didn't work. So can you talk a little bit about, is there like a period of time that you need to commit to a program or a professional to see a difference? I mean, I also take like supplements. I'm like, I don't know if they're doing anything, right? So I think, or is it partially mindset? Like, is that part of it? Like you have to go in believing like it's going to be helpful, or is it, what is it? Or is it the practitioner?
I think anybody who's going in to try acupuncture, they should first go in, and it's almost like an interview. You should always interview all of your practitioners. It doesn't matter who it is, acupuncturists, doctors, gynecologists, whoever. You want to know that it's a right fit to begin with, right? So that is the first and foremost. Try several people, see what they're like, see what you like and don't like, especially if this is new.
Yeah.
I think that's really important. But above and beyond that, I deal a lot with very tough, long-standing cases. Those things don't happen overnight, and they're not going to change overnight. So I do sometimes get people that come in and they're like, so like how many sessions? Like 2, 3. And I'm like, I do not wave a magic wand.
Right,
like this is, this takes time. It is slower moving. It does take more time to resolve, especially long standing issues. You have to give it a little bit of time. I usually like to tell people, I want you to dedicate at least 5 to 10 treatments so that you can start to see where the shifts and changes are happening. And then you also can see like what's sticking around, what needs more work, right? Because it's not going to happen overnight. And, my really tough cases, sometimes it can take me a year. But, for someone who's been suffering for 15 years, 1 year is nothing, right?
So let's talk about long COVID. So tell us how you kind of got into this as a specialization and the success that you're having, what you're doing, how long it took to see like for a patient or several patients, like that you were actually having some success with it.
Well, I was treating patients with something called dysautonomia. Dysautonomia is a condition that can happen as a genetic condition, but more often happens as a result of a traumatic brain injury. So basically what ends up happening is if someone has trauma, the brain trauma, they end up having kind of this autonomic system dysfunction. The autonomic system rules all of our non-voluntary systems. So our heart rhythms, our temperature control, our sleep cycles, our digestive cycles, right? All of those are really non-voluntary. So when someone has dysautonomia, they can go really awry, and a lot of them at the same time. The challenge with that is that we have a multi-system dysfunction that's happening. And let me tell you, when it comes to multi-system dysfunctions, the Western model does not like that, because then you end up seeing a cardiologist and a gastroenterologist and a pulmonologist, and you're like off and running, right? So I started working with that population, and I was having tons of success. And I was like, ooh, this is good, right? And I was having people who had 4, 5, 6 head traumas, and post-concussive trauma, and they were having a harder time bouncing back. It affects people's lives in an absolutely huge way. Lo and behold, my patients are starting to come back online. They are able to multitask. They're able to, sleep better. Their digestive systems are improving. They can play with their kids without a migraine. Like there's all these things that happen. And so one of my friends who is a physician at the hospital, she was like, listen, we've got all these long COVID patients. And she and I were talking, and I was like, I think they look a lot like dysautonomia. And she was like, well, if you're having success with dysautonomia, do you think you'll have some success with long COVID? And I was like, I don't know, but let's give it a go, you know? And it turns out that long COVID is actually quicker to respond because viral load is very different than having head trauma. And so I just kind of started to dive in and started to see more and more patients, and of course, once I have like a handful, then they say to the people that they know that are like, oh, she treats long COVID,
Yeah.
So I ended up having these long COVID patients. So I really kind of fell into it, really.
So tell us, give me one story.
So I have this beautiful young girl who came to me. She was 16. We'll call her Sarah. So Sarah came in and she had gotten COVID and she was incredibly sick, meaning she could not hold down anything. So she would try to eat soups and she would vomit them back up. She couldn't eat anything. She tried all the anti-nausea drugs, nothing. It didn't even make a dent. She was at the point where they were talking about putting in a feeding tube. Yeah. And she's 16 years old, otherwise had been completely healthy. Her mom, who's a nurse, had just started to look around with a little bit of desperation. Like, I have to find something before we do this G-tube. Don't want my kid going on a feeding tube. Yeah. She kind of ended up calling me by chance. It was really by accident. And so Sarah came in, and one of the big things that we can treat is in fact nausea, but also being able to, so short end of it is when you have something like vomiting in Chinese medicine, it's called rebellious qi. Okay. So it's going the wrong direction, right? You're supposed to eat, it's supposed to go downward, and she would eat and it would come upward. Yeah. We have these whole systems designed around rebellious qi. So I started working on her stomach channels and working on her digestive systems and really moving things downward. And she never had any vomiting, not a single bout of vomiting after her first treatment. In fact, it took us probably about 3 months to get her back in good working order. But from that very first visit, she was able to hold food down. And we had to go slowly. We had to really talk about food, how to eat it, what kinds of foods to eat, how we needed to nourish back her body. She had lost a lot of weight. She was just skin and bone.
Could she even go to school? Or?
She couldn't go to school. She was out of school for almost an entire year and had to make up going to school. And they were really worried. Like, this is like her entire life. I mean, her whole life was revolving around, she couldn't get out of bed. She had complete exhaustion. Of course, she's malnourished. So she came in and was able to make a complete and full recovery. I just saw her last week. She still comes in once a month and she's looking at colleges and she's got 1 year left. Yeah, she's doing great.
So that's one story with somebody who had COVID and had a particular ailment. Are you seeing, because people have like fatigue, I mean, they're all different kinds of ailments. So somebody comes in, they have long COVID, or they don't know, they had COVID and they're just not right. They may not even call it that. Right. So do you do like an intake and talk about what their symptoms are, and then you choose something different out of your arsenal depending on what it is?
Right. Well, because the real value of doing Chinese medicine in our diagnosis is that we don't treat diseases, we treat people. And that's a really, really big distinction. And that allows us to really tailor all of our treatments so that we're treating the person as they need it and not as a protocol.
I love that. Yeah. I mean, yes.
Mm-hmm. So one person might present with, absolute fatigue and they are bedridden and they cannot get out of bed. Other people are going to present with digestive issues. Usually there's a smattering of other things that are happening simultaneously. And so because we're able to look at things and say, okay, yes, you've got all these things. This one's really severe. This one's a little bit less. We're not like, oh, well, we're only going to treat this one thing and then you have to go to someone else for the other thing, right? We look at it as a system and an entirety, and it is a whole person. This person has a life and they have children and they have jobs and they have all this stuff happening. And so figuring out how to make sure that we can manage their care based on their needs is what I think is the most valuable piece of it, because the gradient of long COVID is so wide, right? Like you can get some people who have just like maybe a little bit of fatigue and they're more tired than they used to be, to the person who's like completely bedridden, can't hold food down, can't multitask, brain fog, digestive issues, the whole lot.
So what I hear is that your success treating long COVID is actually just Chinese medicine.
Yes.
It's not like some specific magical protocol. It's everything you've learned that you're bringing to bear. Mm-hmm. No pun intended.
Right. Yes. Good one.
And it's no different than you treating anybody coming in with presenting with anything. It's just that perhaps it's a framework or a way of thinking.
Right.
That, okay, send long COVID patients to acupuncturists or Chinese medicine professionals.
Well, there is a big difference because there are some aspects of, so I studied Chinese dietary therapy, in addition to herbs. Picked up a lot of other things nutritionally along the way, whether that's in supplements or other forms. And so I personally do have an infrastructure set that I think about when I use long COVID, because I've been able to look at kind of the patterns that seem to be coming over and over. And while each person is different, I am seeing variations of the same thing with each person that comes in. And so I do have an arsenal that I've like, oh, this worked really well. And I will offer this to somebody and say, hey, here's what I've seen. Here's what I've done in the past. Let's try XYZ. And then we kind of like pick and choose what might be best for their symptoms. But generally speaking, some acupuncturists, this is the hard part, is that not everybody specializes in the same things, right? And so before I did traumatic brain injuries and long COVID, I worked specifically on autoimmune conditions and digestive disorders. So this was already really in my wheelhouse to begin with. But you might go to someone who's an acupuncturist and they do, acufacials. Maybe not the right person for long COVID because they spend a lot of their time thinking in a different modality. Some people are just focused on women's health, or maybe they're specifically focused on menopause, or fertility, right? So you want to, find somebody who believes that, what you have is treatable. There's even some acupuncturists who look at long COVID and they're like, I don't think I can treat that. And so it does vary from practitioner to practitioner. And that does make it hard because it's not a one size fits all for practitioners, and not everybody's going to be focused on what that person needs.
Right. So hopefully with your book, that will help other practitioners to sort of have a framework to approach it.
Yeah.
When you say that you are seeing patterns, can you share some of those patterns? Are they patterns in what's working or in the symptoms, or?
It's mostly patterns of symptoms. So usually what I'm seeing, fatigue seems to be like the kind of the biggest piece of what a lot of people are seeing. So I see a tremendous amount of fatigue. I definitely see a lot of digestive issues that come with that. But one of the things that's really interesting about long COVID is that it also kicks into gear other latent viruses like Epstein-Barr, which is mono, or chickenpox, which comes out as shingles, right? So it kicks into gear, or Lyme's disease, right, can get kicked up. If someone has had exposure to those, even if they're latent, COVID seems to also pop those guys into gear. God forbid they should have more than one of those at the same time. So that can be really challenging to their system. I see a lot of body fatigue and flu-like symptoms. So intermittent fevers, breathlessness occasionally, depending on the age and person. I don't see as much respiratory distress, but it does happen. And I definitely have a long COVID patient who has both fatigue and respiratory issues. And then some of the stuff I see are big histamine reactions. They start having these big responses to all kinds of stuff that they were like, I don't even understand what's happening, but I break out in hives. I've got like rashes. I get hot all of a sudden, and their face and body get red, right? Like almost like an allergic reaction.
Yeah.
So those types of things I'm seeing quite a bit of.
Okay. Well, it's so fascinating. And I hope that your book will help, for other practitioners to be able to, or even patients to seek somebody out.
Yeah. Well, and the goal of the book is it's not just about educating practitioners. The goal is really to give people an understanding that they get to participate in their own healing in a really big way. Because a huge portion of the success that I have isn't necessarily because of acupuncture. A lot of it has to do with dietary changes.
Yeah.
A lot. And the simplest things in how we choose our food and what sorts of food we choose can make or break someone's healing response. And that's the part that I want people to understand, is that there's actually a lot that people can do at home. So even if they have other pharmaceuticals that they have to bring on board, they still have options because those pharmaceuticals usually just, usually there's like one or two for this and one or two for that. And then there's another, and they end up on piles of medication, but they're still bedridden or they're still on disability. A lot of these patients come in, and when they're filing disability, the questions that get asked, like the baseline, are like, can you get dressed by yourself? Can you take a shower? And I'm like, what kind of baseline is that crap?
I love that the book is going to be an individual like myself could find benefit in that. Yes. I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, it's important.
I feel like a lot of And this is an area I'm really interested in learning more about, gut health and digestion and all of these things. I listen to podcasts or I read things and people recommend this supplement or that, or eat this food or that food. And I just have to imagine like it's just not the same for every person. So I'm interested to hear and to read the book and see what it says. And I'm guessing that what works for this person is not going to work for that person, but maybe there are some baseline things.
There are definitely some baseline things. And I think, the overall thing that I always like to tell people is that what I'm seeing, in all of these symptoms, there's this huge rise in inflammation, right? So a lot of what's happening with long COVID is this massive influx of inflammation that's happening all at the same time, hyper responsiveness of the immune system. So being able to calm down that kind of hyper sympathetic nervous system and hyper response to food, a lot of it comes with understanding how to eat whole foods and seasonal choices, right? So, if you live in the mountains, for example, if I said to you, I want you to go get a banana, you'd be like, I'm going to have to go a couple thousand miles in order to get a banana. Well, in part because our environment is helpful in nourishing what we are and who we are and how we survive our environment. So when we live up at altitude, we actually really need good blood building resources to survive at altitude, which is really different than if you live in Southern California. If you want to go out for sushi 3 times a week in California, okay, cool. It's warm. There's a lot of fish is widely available, right? Those are things that we can eat, digest, survive on, and we don't need to have the same blood building resources at sea level that we do at altitude, right? So some of those choices are really important in how we function. Yeah. Eating as close to the earth as possible. That's critical. That's really critical because the more preservatives you have and the more easy food that you come by, the less nutrient density we have. That's really, really important. That nutrients is everything. So, those are a few things that I like to tell people, like there's some big choices that you can make.
Can you explain the role of the meridian system in acupuncture?
Yeah. So there's 12 main meridians that run in the body. And the meridians run somewhere what they consider to be between the skin and the muscle, right? So it's kind of this interstitial space that those meridians run, and they run the entire length of the body. So 12 channel systems, they all relate to an organ system. They all have jobs, and it's actually a pretty intricate channel way system. And there's 365 points that reside on those channels. So when we're looking at someone's diagnostics, we take pulses and we look at the tongue. And the tongue has a little map on it, right? So you can look at a little map. I'll send you one.
Okay.
So in case anyone's curious. So we're looking at these organ systems as they relate to the body and what their functions are, right? So this is part of the training. And we take pulses, and each organ has its own pulse. So I'm looking at your heart rhythm, not just your heart rhythm, but like, what's the consistency of blood? How are your fluids? Do you have good circulation? I can tell a lot by looking at someone's pulses, right? Do we have good energetic support? Are you deficient? Is it excess? Is it like, are you really damp on the inside? Damp is like sticky Louisiana summer on the inside, right? Okay. So figuring out we have these basic 8 parameters that we look at, and those parameters help us decide, okay, for this person, I really need to treat the heart channel, the pericardium channel. And so that deals a lot with anxiety. It has a lot to do with, like sometimes people get panic attacks, right? So if someone has panic attacks, I'm always going to look at their heart pulses. They often have restless sleep, right? They might have a lot of worry, and they'll have a crack that goes all the way down their tongue to the tip, right? That usually tells me there's emotional challenges that this person is dealing with. So when I look at those, then I say, okay, I'm going to choose, I'm a minimalist. So I usually choose, maybe 10 to 15 points. And then I will needle those particular points on the channel systems so that they relate to the job that I'm asking the body to do.
Okay, this is so fascinating. Yeah. So does the tongue ever change? Like, let's say somebody it does?
It does. It totally changes.
So if somebody has anxiety and they have this crack down their tongue and then you help them, that could totally change.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
And the pulses change very easily. They actually change a lot faster than the tongue itself.
Okay.
But the coat of the tongue tells us a lot. The body of the tongue, whether it's swollen or thin, if it has those little like ripples on the side, those are called scallops, right? If it's scalloped, that means it's swollen, right? So is that inflammation, or are things not holding in place properly, right? So there's a lot of information you can get from just looking at the tongue and taking the pulses.
Do you treat your family?
You know what? There's this idea that we can never completely treat our families as well as we can treat a stranger, mostly because we have too many energetic ties to the people and we have a lot of baggage with people that are in our wheelhouse, right? Yeah. And so it can shadow your decision-making, and it can shadow
that totally makes sense
how you would treat them. And so usually I don't. My husband loves to get injured playing tennis. So if he injures himself playing tennis, I'll usually.
I'm sure he doesn't love to do it.
No, he doesn't love to. My kids love acupuncture. They love cupping. So my kids will often, if they're getting sick, they'll be like, "Mama, I think I'm getting sick. Will you put some cups on?" So like I might do like little things. My mom comes in town. She's like, "My neck's bugging me," so I might do like a small little thing, but I don't treat them consistently.
Do you have somebody else treat them?
I do. Well, my kids, I don't think they're ready to go to somebody else. I do have an herbalist that I work with, and she treats my kids. Okay. They're much more apt to do herbs. I have a laser, and I use laser on children often because they're much more open to it, and it's kind of fun, right? So I try to find.
What do you use a laser for?
So there's different lasers that you can utilize on acupuncture points to elicit a similar response. So you can they've done all this research on different hues of laser that you can actually elicit energetic responses on the channel systems.
So instead of using a needle.
That's right. Yeah. So for kids, I'll use cupping, I'll use ear seeds, I'll do because I use a lot of moxa. Moxa is an herb that you burn over the surface of the skin. Okay. So kids love that. They're totally down for that.
Well, and I do understand what you're saying. Like sometimes we have a blind spot with people we love and you wouldn't want to do that. Mm-hmm. So that makes sense too.
But my husband, when I was going through acupuncture school, we weren't legally allowed to treat out because we weren't licensed yet. And so he had, but I kept saying like, I really think you should go see an acupuncturist. So he saw an acupuncturist other than me for years and years. And he'll still go to another acupuncturist. Yeah. He sees other people just because A, it's easier to get on their schedule, and B, I'm not treating him at 9:00 at night, right. When I'm super tired. Right.
And do you see an acupuncturist?
I try. Sometimes I feel lazy and I will lay on my couch and give myself a treatment because I'm too lazy to go. And it depends. I get a lot of different types of body work. Okay. I will pick and choose based on kind of where I'm at and what I need. I do go in for acupuncture. I do herbs. I work with a nutritionist. Just because I have a great base of knowledge doesn't mean that I shouldn't consult with other people to kind of help give me good feedback, because I do think that that's ultimately really important for all practitioners.
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. I talked to Kinley Merchant, who's a therapist down in Salt Lake, and she talks about the importance of therapists getting therapy. And, it seems, so I kind of like to ask that question for experts to see what they're doing for themselves.
Yep. I love body work. It's one of my faves.
So there's so many different kinds of body work. When we found somebody who's wonderful in Salt Lake City, to me, it's very important. We also had a great place in San Francisco. Like people really understand the body and understand what's happening. So they're all different. There's like ART, there are all different kinds of body work, but what do
I do?
Or look for,
in a practitioner? Yeah. It's personality fit just as much as anything else. I will often go through their reputation. Like I'll look at their websites and kind of make decisions based on their education or based on how many years of experience. I love seeing people who have good experience. They've seen more. They have more. Yeah. Like you just have more practice. It doesn't mean that I won't see someone who's, been out of school for 4 or 5 years, but I tend to look for someone who has more experience. Yeah. So I get anything from chiropractic to massage. I'm really down for any and all of it. Like I'll have Reiki, and I love cranial sacral work. That's a big one for me. I do a lot of work, I'm constantly like this all the time. So having my own back worked on and having my own chest opened, and, it's super important. Yeah. For my physical body, just, let alone my emotional.
So how much time would you allocate to, like, let's say in a week or a month, to not any particular modality, but to modalities?
Well, there's lots of things that we can do at home, right? So I always am a big advocate of people doing Qigong, which is a type of meditative movement. It's incredible. It's like acupuncture, but you get to do it yourself. Qigong or Tai Chi, those are great things you can do at home. Exercise is important, but it doesn't mean that you should run on a treadmill and lift weights like 7 days a week, right? There's actually all sorts of studies that have been done on longevity, and the basic 5 things that come to aid in longevity, the number one is just being active. And I think walking and understanding how to take breaks is super important. So exercise and movement, but you want to do something every week, right? Like not just, maybe you want to do some breath work. Breath work is really important. Stretch, wear sunscreen. It's like you kind of like make small decisions every day.
Yeah.
That all play into your well-being and longevity, right? Eat plant food, less sugar, don't overindulge in alcohol. Like all of those are wellness choices, right? Yeah. And that doesn't mean you have to like do anything in particular. You just wake up and make the best possible choices you can for your health, right? Yeah. And I think it's really important. I value very much how people decide. That's why people end up seeing me, right? It's like when things go sideways, and just allowing them to understand how valuable those choices are.
Yeah.
Daily.
Yeah. The small things every day.
Little things that add up to a lot.
One of the things that I'm going to do some more research on this too, is like, I actually think I've over-exercised. Like, it's been so ingrained since I was young. Like, right. You have to exercise, and you have to exercise hard. And the research now is showing like, maybe it's 80-20. I mean,
And not even like so they did this study on like these centenarians, like people who lived over 100. And we're not talking like in an old age home. We're talking, these are people that are like out, doing their life thing. And the five things, they eat beans. Like, this is globally, right?
Okay.
Like, this is the commonalities, the 5 commonalities. They eat beans. They are active. So they garden, they go up and down the steps, they walk to the farmer's market, like that kind of stuff. Like, just generally stay active, right? So they drink very small amounts of alcohol. They still have alcohol, but a little bit. Like a little tiny bit, right? They have very big social networks. Like, that's actually, they think that having social networks is even more important than half of the choices that you make on a daily basis. That's kind of a big deal.
It's a big deal.
Right?
It's a very big deal.
Yeah.
And like, tying it back to my brand Amaton, it's so why I'm focused on human connection, because I feel like we've lost that ability through COVID, and then just all of the polarization on so many issues.
Yeah.
So that's a huge one.
It's a huge one. How do you connect? How do you sit next to someone? I feel like we've lost a lot of that because we're so into our devices. If you and I sat next to each other on the train, can you sit there and have a good conversation with the person next to you? Can you connect with the people that are your neighbors, or the people you play pickleball with, or
whatever?
That social connection is like almost number one.
And what's the last one?
What was the last one? Beans, a small amount of alcohol, activity, social engagement. Oh, what was the last one? It's going to come to me.
Okay, tell me later. Are there any emerging trends in integrative medicine that you're excited about or you find promising?
Are there trends that I find promising? This is super tough because I practice a 5,000-year-old medicine. So anything under a couple hundred years makes me wary.
I love this.
Yeah. So that's a good question. I get asked questions all the time, like about, I don't know, ... light therapy, or, how good are soaks, or, should I practice yoga, hot yoga? The answer is no. And hot yoga is terrible.
Really?
Why? Can I say that? Am I allowed to say it?
Say whatever you want.
It depletes your fluids. So main resources in the body, chi, blood, and fluids. If you deplete those fluids, it just causes a mountain of challenges. And people don't hydrate. So
they're not.
They try, but they're, people love to do these extreme things. They want to sit in an ice bath, and they want to like turn up the yoga thing to like 105 degrees. It sounds like torture to me. Like, why? But it's always these extremes, right? It's like there's such big swings in the health field. Oh, you should only eat like 90% protein and 5%, I don't know, squash, whatever it is.
Eggs are good. Eggs are bad.
Eggs are good. Eggs are bad. Eggs are good. Eggs are bad. Like everybody's, right? It's like no carbs, only carbs. Like it's just so extreme to me. And I'm just like, you know what? Number one, I just feel like we have collectively gotten into this massive eating disorder where people are not enjoying food. And by food, I mean not food like substances, not processed foods. I'm talking about food where you sit down, you prepare a meal, you have people over for dinner, right? There's something so beautiful about participating in the food that you've made or someone else has made and the enjoyment of it.
Totally.
I think exercise, we should enjoy it. Do something that you like.
Yeah.
If you like to walk. These trends make me crazy.
They make us all crazy.
They make everybody crazy. So like wake up, be active, make choices that are good for you. Like, do not smoke 2 packs of cigarettes a day. I feel like that's kind of an obvious one, but I'm going to say it anyway. Yeah. Right? Like, it's like, maybe you want to have a cocktail instead of 4 cocktails, right? So it's like the little bits of moderation that we get to make choices on and enjoy it. I think food should be a pleasure, not a tool or something we control all the time.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's interesting because I spent a year studying in France and I really found that people took time, enjoyed meals in a way that we have trouble with.
We struggle so much. I mean, there's just this perpetual need to like exercise heavily, control our food. And then if we're not like the perfect image and paragon of health, then we're doing something wrong, right? Like there's no room, like I feel like we're not leaving a lot of room for like the pleasure of eating, the pleasure of having walks and exercising and doing things that speak to our heart. Yeah. And then there's so much judgment, like, I only eat this, ... and it's like, well, okay, cool. Great. And maybe we need to do that for medicinal purposes. And we often do. Right. And so I don't want to trash talk, making food choices, but whenever I ask people in my clinic, I always say like, tell me about what you eat. And they say, well, I eat relatively healthy. And I'm like, what does that mean? Exactly. What does that mean? I think healthy is really about the pleasure of this existence and how we make choices on a daily basis that allow us to both participate in life in a big way and to keep these little vessels as sturdy as possible because they have to take us all the way through. Yeah. Right. And, and so some juncture between the two. Right?
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you would like to share with listeners?
Give grace, right? Like allow for people to make mistakes and allow yourself to make mistakes and not, I see so many people on a regular basis and we have so much judgment about good and bad in the health world. And I really would like to take those away and just say to people like, give yourself and other people around you a little bit of grace and allow for people to make mistakes and then allow them to fix it. And that goes the same for everybody, for yourself included.
For yourself included.
Mm-hmm. If you made a mistake, that's okay, right? Like we all do. I mean, how many of us have, like you looked at those Oreos and you're like, yep, I'm having the whole thing. and then you get done and you're like, oh no.
You're like, right? I did not just do that.
I shouldn't have, but I did, right? You did it, right? It's not the end of the world. And you wake up tomorrow and you start all over again and here you are. And then you say, okay, I might have overindulged yesterday, but today I think maybe I'll take a nice walk and I won't eat as much sugar and let it be that, right? That's it. And that's it.
I love it. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for joining me today. It has been not only a pleasure, but such a good reminder. I feel like so many of the things that you said are things that we know, like deep inside, but somehow we've forgotten. And we do have to get back to them, I think, particularly in the United States, Yeah. So it's such a wonderful reminder. And again, thank you so much. And I can't wait for your book.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm really, really happy to talk to you. And I feel like this connection is It's so precious, and I'm just really grateful that you had me on. So thank you.
Thank you. If you enjoyed the show, please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you're listening. It helps us reach more people who just might need these conversations. If you have ideas for future guests or have feedback, you can reach out to us by visiting onthetablewithashley.com, linked in the show notes. On the Table with Ashley is presented by our elevated everyday home brand, Amatand, which you can find at amatand.com. That's AMEATENDRE.com. You can follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Amatand.